urgency meant we were going to make a decision that we would have to change later. And so for me, that started to raise this instant response in me where anytime I noticed the feeling of urgency, I was like, stop, halt. This means I don't have all the information. This means another shoe is going to drop, and I am waiting for that shoe to drop before I make a decision. So put on all the pressure you want, but we are not making a decision until that piece of information is coming. So my intuition said, halt, wait, there's more coming. Hello and welcome to Inside Conscience-Driven Leadership. This is episode 3 of our first season, which we're calling Thinking Out Loud. I'm here with my co-host, the lovely Julie Euber.
Hi.
And we're going to talk today about distortions because in our first couple episodes, that is what really started coming up. It's like the thing that needs talking about. So, Julie, what are your thoughts about distortions?
I think they're really important to start with because it helps us kind of circle around exactly what we're talking about. Because sometimes you need a little bit of it's not this, it's not that in order to really get to what it is so that it makes sense in people's minds.
Absolutely. And I think because we're talking about intuition so much, and intuition is this like squishy thing inside of us that we feel. So how do we know when it's intuition and it's telling us something that's true? And how do we know when it's some other thing masquerading as intuition that's telling us something false? And ultimately, that's what a distortion is the squishy feeling that's leading you away from the truth you know instead of toward the truth you know.
Do you feel like we mostly identify those like through how our body feels, or how do people kind of experience distortions?
There's definitely a somatic element to distortions, right? Because there's a somatic element to intuition. Like we talk about, our intuition is what we feel in our gut. I was talking to somebody just the other day about how she had this great job opportunity and there was no reason on paper she shouldn't take it, except for her gut, her literal gut said, you cannot work with this person. And she didn't take the job because that spoke so loud and clear. I'm like, that's your internal pattern recognition system warning you about something that your conscious brain can't recognize yet. But distortions also show up in our body. They show up in adrenaline, they show up in our muscle tension, they show up in like a feeling of being flushed. Ultimately, I mean, distortions are a version of the kind of fight, flight, freeze, appease, protective protective impulses that we have. Like they're not those in a pure state, but they're those in a learned state, I think.
Yeah, that's great. There's something that you said in a previous podcast that has just kind of stuck with me that I kind of wanted you to talk a little bit more about. And it's about the nature of intuition. I think it does relate to distortions, but you had mentioned that intuition is always right. And I wondered
Mm.
if you could talk a little more about that because that is both I wonder, my internal dialogue around that is it because it's always right for you and you know what you need? Or is it really tapping into something more true beyond yourself? Like it feels on the cusp of science and woo, and I'm just curious where
Yeah.
you see it go.
I think intuition definitely lives on the cusp of science and woo. Well, and I also think that science doesn't like to ask questions about woo. This is the thing. My sister's a scientist, and she totally will be like, well, the science says that science can't show that that's true. I'm like, that doesn't mean it's not true. That means science can only answer questions it knows how to ask and knows how to measure the answer to. And that's actually really limited when it comes to understanding what we know. And so like science does show us things that are true, but it also shows us the version of the thing that we can prove, and which sometimes later we decide we can prove it with more information or better measuring or whatever, like is Pluto a planet or not?
Mhm.
Undecided, right? Some people very clearly yes, some people very clearly no. And so intuition is telling you stop or go, right? Listen, so that's one of the things we know. Intuition only acts in two directions. It either says move now or stop now. And in conscience-driven leadership, we call those halt and high. And halt is obvious. We know that. Halt is whoa, stop, don't move forward. And high, I chose as a word because it's a horse word. And so if we're going to use something arcane, we're going to use a horse word because that's what I come from. So
Mhm.
high is a word you say when you're driving a team, means move on. means go forward. So high means go forward. Hopefully, intuitively, you could tell halt and high. One means stop, one means go. If we consider that intuition is a pattern recognition system based on a lot of experience with these highly complex, high stakes environments, it's telling you stop or go based on the experience you have. And so based on your experience, your intuition is saying go or stop. I think that's always right. I think we have to believe that. I think we're never going to be able to show and prove that I don't know, but, like, I don't know, do you have this experience when you ignore your intuition? Do you live to regret it every single time?
I don't know. I don't know that I recognize it as that very often. I do think that sometimes that's I feel that it is this way. This other person very clearly doesn't want to go that way, so I'm gonna let them find out. And oftentimes I am correct, and then there are other times that I feel like I'm wrong, and I do think that in some ways that makes intuition more like science in that it's about those repeated trials and,
Mm,
the iterative process. Like, you've gone through this iterative process and now your brain has more information, just like in
mhm,
science. But in science, there's also, different types of observer error.
mhm,
Like one is intra observer error, where if you measure it wrong all the time, then you're going to be wrong, or if you may not be consistent in how you measure it.
mhm,
And that can happen in the most precise environments. And so I don't know, to me, and please, I would love if you have a different perspective on this. It may be true for you right now, like Pluto is a planet. But then as
uh-huh.
you continue to grow and get more information, just like science, maybe Pluto isn't a planet, but in that moment, it made sense for Pluto to be a planet, and
Right,
now it
okay.
doesn't. And I wonder if intuition works that way too.
What if I reframe it and I say, instead of intuition is always right, it's never wrong to follow your intuition?
Yes, that makes more sense to me.
That
Thank you.
following your intuition is telling you something important. You might gain more information, you might gain a new data point in that pattern recognition system, but I think the chances that you live to regret listening to your intuition versus the chances that you regret not listening to your intuition, I think the consequences of listening to your intuition are really rarely going to be as dangerous or harmful or negative as ignoring your intuition, because there is something your intuition is not trying, it is telling you something important. Your intuition is telling you something valuable to the circumstances. And if you don't heed it, if you don't at least make a conscious choice of I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do this, and you just silence it and ignore it, you're missing out on a piece of wisdom that's one of your most valuable assets. And so I don't think you're ever wrong to listen to your intuition, even if the outcome doesn't lead the way you expect it to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think that leads us in really well to how to know when it's your intuition and when it's one of these distortions.
So, yeah, distortions are ultimately protective, right? Like distortions are ways that our brain and our body is trying to protect us using tools that worked once upon a time but are no longer helpful. One of the things I think is important as backstory for this is to understand that my husband loves the intersection of Buddhism and psychology and is like such a nerd about the nervous system and somatic experiencing. And so, like, that intersection of his passions, we've been married for 25 years, so that has leaked into me a lot over the years because this is what he loves to talk about over dinner is, like, how the nervous system works and what are all the different threat state adaptations and how do we especially Buddhism is really in a lot of ways, Buddhism is a perspective shifting model, right? Like, Buddhism is saying, we don't need to change the world, we need to change how we interact with the world, how we think about experiences. That's where how we overcome suffering or unsatisfactoriness or right, like whatever word we're using for that state of being uncomfortable in life that Buddhism exists to address. So, um, an approach then becomes noticing how you're feeling, noticing what it is in your body, in your mind, what is the story it's telling you, and then recognizing and saying, "Thank you. I appreciate that this feeling exists because at some point in my life, it protected me. But now that I'm a whole grown up, I maybe don't need that protection anymore. So that's where distortions come from. Like that's how they came up for me in this is like, yeah, but intuition, what is it when your brain and your body are lying to you? Because sometimes your brain and your body is saying, go, 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 right? Like one of my kind of aphorisms is urgency is the enemy. Like if something feels urgent, to me, that is a clear signal to slow the hell down. Because if something feels urgent, you're there's something missing. You are operating on somebody else's timeline, on someone else's pressure. But like, how is urgency different than high? Right? Like, what is the difference there? How they both are feeling, saying move. How do we help people understand the difference between those?
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot because I do realize that when I'm in an environment where people are trying to push me to make a decision or are trying to make things feel very urgent and important, I really have to have the self discipline to step back and say, okay, is it? When do we actually need to have this? And at what point is it kind of an anxiety of needing certainty from
Mhm.
someone that is giving me that pressure to act? And those are some of my least favorite leadership times.
Yeah, it became for me, and this was early in my circus days, it became to me, I was like, "Wait, I'm feeling urgent, we're putting on the brakes." If
Yeah.
I feel like I need to make a decision right now because, from that, like, place of anxiety, from that place of feeling flooded or, full of cortisol or full of adrenaline or whatever, mm, it's usually because I'm trying to close a loop that I'm not comfortable having open. So that, like, feeling of urgency is ultimately a version of flight in the fight, flight, freeze, appease model, right? Like, this is flight means run, urgency is helping you escape.
Yeah.
And we're outrunning discomfort by acting quickly. And some people might be like, "That's great, it's decisive," but in reality, you're avoiding the uncertainty of, "I don't know what the right decision is yet." And there's something for me, it became and I operate, like, on the balance of science versus woo. I totally, like, am comfortable on the woo side of things because I think there's a lot we don't know, and I'm okay not being able to explain everything. That's just my comfort level.
Yeah, I love
And
that. I
so
think I'm a little more on the other side, on the science side, and I think that's why together we have really good conversations.
exactly right, because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, that" I will stay one of my nicknames from ages ago is Hyperbole Hanna, because it's not a good thing. It's the greatest thing that's ever been. So intuition's never wrong. Hyperbole Hanna at work, right? So thank you for that reflection and
No,
invitation
it's so
to, see it
exciting.
differently.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so we wanna look decisive, we want, urgency. Urgency is the first distortion we're talking about. So urgency distortion is one of the 5 named distortions in the conscience-driven leadership ecosystem. And it's the one that yeah, that wants to close the loop because it's just really not comfortable. And a lot of these distortions also come from our natural bias of being humans, right? So, like, we have a bias toward action, action good, non-action bad. And I think this was one of my first, like, major leadership transformation moments was realizing that urgency and my dad is a very urgent forward guy. So working for him, he always wants it done yesterday. Um, and so I learned that urgency meant we were gonna make a decision that we would have to change later. And so for me, that started to raise this instant response in me where anytime I noticed the feeling of urgency, I was like, "Stop, halt. This means I don't have all the information. This means another shoe is gonna drop, and I am waiting for that shoe to drop before I make a decision. So put on all the pressure you want, but we are not making a decision until that piece of information is coming." So my intuition said, "Halt, wait, there's more coming." I couldn't tell you what it was, and there always was. There was always another layer that just hadn't happened yet. Like, right? There's a thing that hasn't happened yet. We gotta wait for it to happen, and then we'll know how to move forward.
yep. That makes a lot of sense. I think the way that I've learned to kind of deal with that is I do think oftentimes it's people wanting certainty, and I think sometimes it can also be a misunderstanding of leadership, that leadership is just making decisions.
Oh, yes, this
And
leadership is
I don't
decisive.
think yeah, and maybe that's because people have felt that frustration when decisions aren't being made. But
Mhm.
to swing in the complete opposite direction of just saying all we need are decisions leads us to
For
change
every
that is unnecessary. Because
Yeah.
change can be good, but it shouldn't be for no reason or because we weren't thoughtful about it the first time to, the
Mhm.
best case scenario. So for me, especially when certainty is needed, it was my answer is more around the lines of, okay, then what are our steps to it? And what is our kind of stopgap that we can pause at while we're waiting for that information to come in? Because once people see the path forward, I think it solves some of that tension that can help people see, no, I don't need to know this right now, but I do know that it's being worked on and it's not being neglected. And I think that can harness that feeling of safety that people sometimes need to move forward with their day and do the work they need to do.
Yeah, well, and this is there's a strengths, pairing of this that we have actually that works in exactly this way. So I'm a certified strengths coach. For those of you who don't know, I've worked with Gallup's Clifton Strengths for like a decade. I've done like thousands of debriefs with folks. So activator is a strength that's really high for me that wants to get started right away. Like activator, like we talked about it. What are we doing? What are we doing? We're leaving a meeting with no action plans. What are you talking about? Go, 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 go. It brings a catalytic sense of urgency, which can be great. You, on the other hand, have intellection, which is kind of the opposite of activator. And activator, if you don't get to sleep on it, you're going to lose sleep over it. Because activator, or not activator, intellection needs to think things through before making a decision because you will make a better decision with more time. Activator doesn't make a better decision with more time. It's just how we work. So when I coach clients with this pairing, I always say, if you've got an activator on the team, tell them when you'll make a decision. Just say like, yeah, that's really important. I'm going to think about it. I will have a decision for you Monday. That's all they need to know. Right? Like, are we there yet? No, but we'll be there in 2 hours. Okay, now I can I'll go activate 16 other things between now and Tuesday or now and Monday. But right, like tell them when. Tell them when. So I think the same thing when that's responding, right? Rather than a reflex. I think the urgency distortion feels more like a reflex, which is why
Yeah.
it's why it's so hard to parse out between intuition. And I think when we respond to that reflex and it winds up biting us in the ass, we go, oh, I can't trust my intuition because my intuition said go. And really it was time to stop. And like, I think if you're having that experience, I think you're experiencing an urgency distortion, not a true high signal to move forward.
That's interesting. But then some things are urgent, right? So, like,
Yeah,
not all urgency is necessarily a bad signal.
no, but like, let's talk. Like, what's something that's urgent? What's a truly urgent situation that you can think of?
I'm thinking like a first aid situation or something where there's
Okay.
someone whose life is at risk, or
Okay.
there's something like it does seem like I'm trying to think of a business case for that too. And some of that is, um, but I'll have to think on that. But it does seem like there are some times when there are people who could be at risk and your decision needs to be now. It's the same as when we put together plans for if there's an emergency and an event that we're going to run so that
Hmm.
we can act quickly because there's going to be urgency around that. So I think safety is a key aspect of that. But I
Yep.
think also sometimes there's some urgency that is built into like funding systems sometimes. So I do think there's some real urgency, not as much as we think, but it's certainly there.
Yeah, and I think pausing to say, what are the consequences of not making a decision in this moment solves for that, right? Like, if the consequences of not making a decision in this moment, I don't think that truly urgent situations feel the same though as an urgency distortion signal.
I agree with that. Mhm.
Because the urgency distortion is like, "Oh, crap, I need to make a decision, I need to make a decision." And when there's an emergent situation or there's real risk associated with procrastinating a decision, I don't think we feel the same thing. I don't think it feels like urgency in our bodies as much as it's an
Yeah.
understanding that action is required and decisiveness is required. If I don't make a decision right now, is something really terrible gonna happen? 'Cause I think that's what I realized is like, "Wait a minute. I'm putting all this pressure on myself to make a decision really quickly that doesn't need to be made, right? Like I'm imagining, I am creating this feeling all on my own. Um, and I'm putting pressure on myself to make a decision by an arbitrary deadline or da da or because my dad likes things to happen really quickly, and he's not always right about that, right? Like,
No. Yeah.
and we had lots of emergent situations. I love when, like, time will slow down for me. Like, you get somebody who's hurt in the show must go on is not a tagline, right? Like, that's it's not
Right.
like a motto, it's a real thing. Like, there is an audience, they expect something to come out the curtain. If somebody gets injured in the ring, which happens with horses, that's a thing, things break, horses fall, etcetera. You gotta we had a show board backstage that said who who was in every role, which horse was playing every part, who was, getting them dressed, etcetera. And so you'd have to, like, while like, we had a stall light for the actors to be like, "Riff on it for a minute while we figure out what we're doing." And we would just rewrite the show real quick and then, like, yell out the answers. And I love, like, a time pressure situation. Those are super fun, but they don't feel urgent. They feel important. They feel, mm,
Activating in some
activating.
ways.
Mhm. It's more just like high speed adaptation, right? It's we have to adapt in the moment. It's an adaptation because the moment requires it. Let's see. We have 4 other distortions to chat through. Do you have one that you feel like naturally flows or one that you're super excited about?
I think threat feels the closest to urgency and an interesting one to move to.
Yeah, yeah. So threat distortion is the fight and fight or flight, right? Like threat feels like we are under attack, right? Like this one's real easy to know what it feels like in your body because it feels the same as when something genuinely terrifying is happening, right? Like, so this is our nervous system scanning for danger. Intensity often misreads as threat. We also, it depends on our history. I think we all have like our triggers for something that feels threatening. And it activates our sympathetic nervous system, right? The fight flight. It which floods our body with cortisol and reduces our ability to experience nuance, empathy, and flexibility. So, right, like uh, it feels like we have to be strong. Feels like we have to hold up a shield. But it's narrowed. And one of the things I love is that, like, so emotional flooding is that feeling, which happens with the threat distortion. It happens with other things too, but emotional flooding is when your body dumps a whole bunch of cortisol into your bloodstream and you, like, feel that pressure rise in your throat and everything shuts down. The awesomest thing I ever read, though, is it only takes 20 minutes to go away. So when you have that
Really?
feeling,
Hmm.
yeah, you can just be like, "Hang on, I'm feeling emotionally flooded right now. I'm gonna take a walk, I'll be back in 20 minutes." And then you can continue
Ooh,
the conversation because if you go for a walk, you move your blood through your body, the cortisol will distribute and it will disperse, and you'll be able to come back and not be in this reactive threat mode. So, it's terribly easy to fix. We aren't taught how to escape it, which makes it worse and scarier because when we're in that space, we tend not to be the version of ourselves that is great at de-escalating.
sure. Yeah, and that makes me reflect that I remember times when I didn't have 20 minutes, but even just taking a pause was huge for me. And the most common example of that is in interviews. When I've interviewed for
Mm.
jobs and things like that, I had an experience where the interviewer was like the president of the company, was the kind of my final boss to get this job. And in the middle of it, they were just looking at my resume and just said, I don't really see why you're a fit. And that feels a little threatening because
Yeah.
everything had been going super well and I really wanted this job. And I realized, okay, I can react to this or I can take a minute. I was like, actually, I just need a couple seconds. Can you give me just a second to sit? And he did. And then I was able to kind of talk a little bit more about why I felt there was good fit here and why I could grow in the position in a way that was valuable. So I couldn't be like, "I'm gonna step out for a 20-minute walk," but
Mhm.
even when you can't do a 20-minute walk, the chance to just take that pause, I think honestly, I think there's a little bit of a shift in power too, because some of it is that feeling of helplessness in the face of threat, and when you give yourself that time, it validates that there isn't a power over you that you really have to be responding to as if it's a threat.
Right, right, and again, back to the, like, Buddhism, psychology sphere, right? Anytime we can choose to respond rather than react, we're gonna do something that's more aligned with who we are as a person. And it takes such a little gap to make that happen, right? Like, the awareness that you are reacting is all you need to open up a little space, and once the little space is open, it's easy to squeeze right in there and be like, "Okay, now here are my choices." And I can ask for something, right? Threat distortion absolutely tells you you cannot ask for anything because you're under attack. So, realizing that it's a distortion, that you probably are not physically in danger, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking about you're walking on a street in the night and there's a stranger behind you, or a dog is growling at you or something where you are literally under threat. Like, so imagining what is a real threat? What is a threat that is where your physical safety or even your emotional safety is at risk? And what what might, right, like, if you're susceptible to threat distortion, because 'cause we're each susceptible to different distortions. That's one of the things I think
Sure.
that's really important about this is these are not universal. We all are gonna have different ones. Like, you are probably not at you're disinclined toward an urgency distortion because you have strengths that naturally want to slow down and think. And so, if somebody pushes on you to be urgent, you're gonna be like, "I'm gonna need you to prove that to me." I will make a decision if you require it at this moment, but your natural patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior are not to move first, think later. They're to think first, move later. Whereas I am a move first person, so it's really easy for me to get caught up in the
Mm.
moment. And I'm very susceptible to an urgency distortion. And so that's why for me it had to get really bad before I could recognize that it was happening.
I could think of times when people really pushed on that urgency piece, and it was hard to always listen to my intuition that this wasn't real, but that just felt like a misaligned culture that I had to work through.
Yeah.
And so some of that is a sometimes seeing that it's a culture piece that you have to be mindful about. Just because you're not susceptible to it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you sometimes too.
Yes. So yeah.
But once that's away, it's just so much easier to be a natural leader in that space.
Yeah. So I think the natural transition from threat is to narrative distortion. I do think everybody experiences this
Ooh, tell
'cause,
me more.
well, we're storytelling machines, right? Like,
Yeah.
humans love to tell stories. We love to invent stories about every single thing that happens to us. So narrative distortion is when we accept the first version of the story, especially a version of the story that's based in a negativity bias, right? Like, so, this person did this because they hate me, right? Whatever action it was intended, it's the intent versus impact. We take the impact and we assume that the intent existed. Um, or there's nothing I can do about this. It's an impossible situation and I can't solve it. Narrative distortion. We've accepted this first negative version of the story and we're stuck on it. And so it can feel like halt because it's like, well, I can't, right? like, there's nothing I can do about it. The situation is stuck and permanent. But it's really just us telling ourselves an unhelpful story. And I don't know where Luke, my husband, got it from, but what's the most useful story I can tell myself in this situation? What is the story I'm telling myself? Like, how do I tell a helpful story? Or how do I tell an empowering story? Or, like, just creating awareness that you are telling yourself a story. You can't help it. It's not a flaw. It's a thing you do. Some of us are wired to tell the positive. Like, I have positivity as a strength since we're talking about strengths today. Do you have positivity too? I think you do.
I don't remember, if I'm
I don't remember.
honest. I tend to
But
be pretty positive, though.
yeah, yeah, like, some people are inclined toward things are probably okay, and let's imagine the situation will work out. Not everybody is wired that way, and not everybody has the option to be wired that way, like, based on life experiences, if you get the answer enough times that this things don't work out, you will eventually, you'll start believing that, and then it's true all the time.
Yeah, I'm really excited that, at my organization, we now have a culture of when something goes wrong, let's get excited about it because we get to, like, problem solve together. This is gonna be fun. This is a problem we get
Yay!
to solve as a team, which
You definitely have
is very
positivity.
positivity,
We're
which
gonna
it makes
solve the
it more
problem.
fun. It
Yeah,
means we're not alone when something goes wrong, and
yeah,
I do think that that's a narrative too of this is gets just as a part of our journey.
yeah. Well, and it's a very scientist approach, right?
Yeah.
Like, you learn something.
Yay.
Failure means
I
we
love
learned something.
learning.
We can try it a different way. Like, okay,
Yeah.
well, now we know that doesn't work. We've crossed one off the list. What's
Yes.
next?
Yeah.
Um,
And you talked about finding the story that best serves you. I think that that's powerful. I think another tool that comes in handy for me is I do love gray space. I am not just black and white. I love gray space, and I think that when we focus on one narrative, sometimes we lose the benefits of gray and get stuck a little more in black and white. And so for me, sometimes in order to not get stuck in one story, even if it's positive, it may not help you if it's not close to true. But what's close to true is often multiple stories. It's just like those movies where you watch different characters' perspectives to a story, and they all are a little bit different, but they're all true.
yeah,
And so sometimes if I feel like I'm really getting stuck in a story, I challenge myself to come up with other stories that could be true.
yeah.
And that kind of loosens me up from it being negative or positive because most of the time it's just not that straightforward.
It's never that straightforward. You've stumbled into one of my, like, first big, like, leadership mentorship lessons in the circus because let me tell you, young circus performers, very susceptible to narrative distortion and threat distortion. Oh my gosh, yeah, whoever made them fall off the horse is definitely that person was trying to murder them. Like,
I see.
whatever they did wrong, like, it's not my fault, it's that person's fault. Like, that's a very normal, like, yeah, I mean, it's a normal young person thing, but when you have young people who are professional performers, you wind up with a lot of these conflicts in the ring where it's they come out and they're screaming at each other, and they both will tell you something that sounds like they couldn't possibly have been in the same room. Like, who? And a third person has a third version that also does not sound like it happened in the same room. And that room was a ring full of spotlights with 1,000 people watching them. And yet, they all had such completely different experiences that they're now in this huge conflict and they're really stuck in their narrative distortion. And so I think this might have been this is another early one that I learned to like unstick because I would have the perception equals reality talk with them where right? Where I would be like, "Tell me what happened. First, let me hear the story because you've got the story, and if I don't listen to the story, we're never gonna get anywhere." So, okay, great. You tell me that story. Now, can I share with you that the other guy in the ring has a totally different experience of what happened? And, like, your story is 100% true. I know that is how you experienced this moment. But that guy, how he experienced the moment, that is also true for him. I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm not saying he's wrong, I'm saying both of you were right, but we gotta leave room for there to be more than one version of the truth here.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
just again, that like, how do we crawl out the window and look at the wider picture? And this gets into a later thing. This is a skill we'll talk about in contents-driven leadership that I think is probably the hardest skill and the most important one, which is pivotry, which
Mm.
is all about changing the narrative in yourself and in other people. But that's a little teaser for down the road. Eventually, I don't think we'll get to pivotry in the first season, but teaser.
For another day.
Pivotry is a thing.
Yep.
Pivotry is definitely a way out of narrative distortion. So, yeah, I think those 3 distortions are probably plenty for one conversation. Distortions are a little heavy. We've been talking for a long time. And so we'll cover the last 2 distortions, which are kinda related to each other, narrative and boundary, in our next episode. Before we sign off, what's something that's kinda sticking in your brains?
Really just the power of storytelling and
Mm,
to be mindful of that because Um, another podcast I love is Normal Gossip, and it talks about the role that gossip can play and how it can be really important, especially when people who have less power in a situation. It's a way for them to really share important information and that it can be really vital. But
Mhm.
where it can kind of go astray and kind of impact the culture that you're in is when there are a lot of these stories that are going around that have little to no truth in them and that they can be negative for someone.
Yeah.
So it just makes me think about the relationship between storytelling and culture and what we might
Mm.
do.
Yeah,
What about you?
absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, I think all the distortions are ultimately stories are we're trained to tell ourselves, right? Like we're programmed with these stories from our youth and from negative experiences. And again, they're things that protected us. We feel a sense of urgency to move because we're trying to escape something. We feel a sense of guarding or threat because we're trying to protect ourselves from something. We get stuck on a story because there's a sense of safety in the story. And so these things wind up harming us, but they were at one time something that helped us. And I think it's just important to remember that, like, experiencing these is normal and there's nothing wrong with it. And just building awareness around it is the goal. So,
Love that.
all right. So, signing off, remember for season 2, we're going to be answering your questions. So, please drop us an email at podcast@conscience-driven-leadership.com. And yeah, we'll be coming back at you soon with the final 2 distortions. And yeah, I'm Hannah Miller,
I'm Julie Euber.
and this is Inside Conscience Driven Leadership. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye.